The courthouse hallway smelled like old paper and sharp coffee. Grandma Ruth sat on a hard wooden bench with a folder on her lap. The folder was so worn at the corners that it looked tired too. Her hands were folded on top of it, but they would not stop shaking. Across the hallway, a woman laughed softly with her lawyer. The woman's hair was smooth and shiny. Her clothes looked expensive. Her smile looked practiced, like she had done it in a mirror many times. That woman was Brielle, Talia's mother, the mother who had not called in 14 years. Ruth tried not to stare, but her eyes kept going back. It felt impossible. For so long, Brielle was like a ghost, only a name that hurt to say out loud. And now she was here, real and bright, acting like she belonged. Talia stood beside Ruth. She was 28 now, tall and calm-looking with her dark hair tied back neatly. People always said Talia looked strong. But Ruth could see the tightness in her jaw and the way she pressed her lips together. It was the same look she had when she was 14 and trying not to cry. A man in a suit walked past and whispered to another man, "That's the millionaire girl." Ruth felt her stomach twist. Yes, Talia had sold her company for millions. It was in the news. It was online. People talked about it like it was a fairy tale. But Ruth knew what came before the money. 14 years of scraped knees and late-night homework. 14 years of empty birthdays where the phone never rang. 14 years of Ruth doing everything alone. Now, because of those millions, Brielle had suddenly remembered her child. The courtroom doors opened with a slow creak. "Carter versus Carter," the clerk called. Ruth stood up, legs stiff. The folder felt heavy, like it held stones instead of paper. Talia touched Ruth's elbow. "I'm here," she whispered. Ruth nodded, but her throat was too tight to speak. They walked inside and sat at their table. The courtroom was colder than the hallway. The lights were too bright. Ruth could hear her own heartbeat, loud and slow like a drum. Brielle sat on the other side. She glanced at Talia and let her eyes fill with tears right on time. She looked like the sad mother in a movie. Ruth's hands curled into fists under the table. "Don't fall for it," Ruth told herself. "Don't fall for the face. Watch the words." The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then everyone sat. Judge Marwick was older, with grey hair and a serious mouth. His eyes were sharp, more like he could see straight through lies. Ruth hoped he could. Brielle's lawyer stood first. He spoke smoothly, like oil. "Your Honor, this case is heartbreaking. A young girl was taken from her mother at 14. For years, the mother tried to reach her child. But the grandmother blocked contact, turned the child against her, and kept her hidden. This is a clear case of parental alienation." Ruth's eyes widened. Taken? Hidden? Her heart thumped hard. Brielle lowered her head and dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She looked brave and broken at the same time. Ruth wanted to stand up and shout, "That is not true. None of it." But her lawyer, Mr. Henson, placed a gentle hand on Ruth's arm, like a warning. "Wait." Then Brielle spoke. Her voice was soft, almost sweet. "I loved my daughter," Brielle said. "I did. But Ruth, she hated me. She made me look like a monster. She told Talia awful things. She made Talia believe I abandoned her." Ruth's breath caught. Hated her? Ruth hadn't had time to hate. Hate takes energy. Ruth had spent her energy on school lunches and rent and doctor visits, on keeping the lights on making sure Talia didn't fall apart. Brielle continued, wiping another tear. "I sent gifts. I called. I begged. but Ruth wouldn't let me see my own child. And now my daughter is successful. She sold her company for millions. I'm proud of her. I just want what's fair. Ruth felt like she had been slapped. Fair? Where was fair when 14-year-old Talia stood on Ruth's porch with a suitcase and shaking hands? Where was fair when Ruth stayed up all night because Talia had a fever and there was nobody else to call? Talia's fingers tightened around a pen. She kept her eyes on the table, not on her mother. Judge Marwick looked down at a stack of papers. "Ms. Carter," he said to Brielle, "you're saying you attempted contact for 14 years?" "Yes," Brielle said quickly, "many times." "And you have proof?" the judge asked. Brielle's lawyer slid a packet forward. "We have messages, screenshots, statements from friends and family." Ruth's mouth went dry. Screenshots, statements, friends and family. Ruth's mind raced. People could say anything. People could fake things. Ruth had seen it online, how easy it was to twist a story. Mr. Henson stood. "Your Honor, we deny these claims. Mrs. Ruth Carter has raised Talia since the age of 14 because the parents left. Not because she stole her." Brielle turned her head toward Ruth, and the tears vanished for half a second. Her eyes were cold. Then the tears came back. Ruth stared at her, stunned. That look. That cold look. It was the first honest thing Brielle had shown all day. The judge turned to Ruth. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "why didn't you encourage a relationship between Talia and her parents?" Ruth's lungs froze. "Encourage?" Ruth tried to speak, but her voice came out thin. "Your Honor, they left her. They didn't call. I tried." The judge raised a hand. "I'll need facts, not feelings. Dates, records, proof." Proof. That word dropped into Ruth's chest like a rock. How do you prove 14 years of staying? How do you prove bedtime stories and scraped knees and quiet crying behind a bathroom door? Ruth looked at Talia. Talia still hadn't lifted her eyes. Then, slowly, Talia reached into her bag. She didn't pull out money. She didn't pull out a fancy document. She pulled out a small plain item Ruth had never seen before, something that looked simple. But the way Talia held it made Ruth's stomach tighten. Talia finally looked up, straight at the judge, and her voice was calm as glass. "Your Honor," she said, "I can prove exactly who was there for me, and who wasn't." Ruth's heart lurched as Talia placed the item on the table, sliding it forward like a secret she had kept for years. The courthouse felt far away after that day, but the fear Ruth carried home was real. It sat in her chest like a heavy brick. That night, Ruth could not sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house creak. Even though Talia was grown now, Ruth still listened the way she used to when Talia was a child, waiting for a nightmare cry, a cough, a whispered "grandma" in the dark. In the morning, Ruth made tea and watched steam rise from the cup. Her hands still trembled a little. Proof, the judge had said. Dates, records. Ruth got up and walked to the hall closet. At the very back, behind old winter blankets, sat a dusty storage box she almost never touched. It wasn't labelled. It didn't need to be. Ruth knew what was inside. She brought it to the kitchen table and lifted the lid. The smell of paper and time rose up. Inside were stacks of folders, envelopes and notebooks. Some were thin. Some were thick. They looked like nothing special, just boring life stuff. But Ruth's life had been built out of boring life stuff, and it all started on one terrible afternoon 14 years ago. Back then, Ruth was 63. Her knees hurt more often than not. Her house was small. Her paycheck was smaller. She didn't expect surprises. She didn't want them. So when the doorbell rang and she opened the door and saw Talia standing there with a suitcase, Ruth thought it was a visit. Just a visit. Talia was 14, still shaped like a child but trying hard to look older. Her hair was messy like she had brushed it too fast. Her eyes were red like she had cried and then wiped her face and promised herself she wouldn't cry again. Behind her, a car sat at the curb. Ruth saw Brielle at the wheel, hands on the steering wheel, sunglasses on. Evan sat in the passenger seat. He didn't turn around. Brielle got out, hugged Talia quickly and kissed her cheek like she was checking a chore off a list. "Mum," Brielle said to Ruth, smiling too wide, "we just need you to keep her for a little while." Ruth frowned. "A little while? What do you mean?" Brielle waved her hand. "Things are messy right now. It'll be better soon." Evan finally spoke, but his voice was low and tired. "It's temporary." Ruth looked at Talia. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" Talia stared at the ground. Her fingers were wrapped around the suitcase handle so tight her knuckles looked pale. Brielle pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and placed it in Ruth's hand. "Here, just read it later. We're running late." Ruth unfolded it right there, but it didn't say much, just a few quick lines. "We'll be back. Please take care of her." Oh, don't make this harder. No date, no plan, no number that worked when Ruth tried it. Ruth's mouth went dry. "Brielle, you can't just..." But Brielle was already walking back to the car. Evan didn't even look Ruth in the eyes. Ruth stepped forward. "Where are you going? When will you come back?" Brielle paused, one hand on the car door. "Soon." Then they drove away. The car turned the corner and vanished, and that was it. At first, Ruth stayed calm because she had to. She brought Talia inside, made her sit at the kitchen table, and put a plate of food in front of her. Talia didn't eat. Ruth tried again. "Tell me what happened." Talia's voice was small. "They said they're going to fix things. They said I'd be safer here for a bit." "Safer from what?" Ruth asked. Talia shrugged. "Tch, I don't know." That was the first twist Ruth didn't understand. If you don't know what you're safer from, then the adults are hiding something. The phone rang later that evening. Ruth grabbed it so fast her fingers slipped. But it wasn't Brielle. It was a friend, asking about church. Ruth tried Brielle's number, straight to voicemail. Ruth tried Evan's. No answer. She tried again. Nothing. The next day, Ruth drove to their apartment. The blinds were closed. A neighbor said, "They moved out yesterday." Moved out. Yesterday. Ruth stood on the sidewalk with her arms full of questions. She drove to Evan's job. The person at the desk said, "He hasn't been here. I think he quit." Quit? Ruth went to the address on Old Mail. The place was empty. When she returned home, Talia was sitting on the couch, staring at the door like she expected it to open any second. Like her parents would walk in laughing and say it was all a misunderstanding. Ruth sat beside her. "They'll call," Ruth lied softly, because the truth was too sharp to hand to a child all at once. That night, Talia cried in the bathroom. Ruth heard it through the door. She stood outside, unsure what to do. You can't pull grief out of someone like a splinter. You can only sit nearby and let them know they are not alone. The next morning, Ruth did what she always did when she was scared. She made a plan. She called the school and explained that Talia would be staying with her. The secretary asked, Does she have guardianship papers? Ruth hesitated. Not yet. The secretary's voice became careful. We'll need something. That was when Ruth understood. Love wasn't a form you could fill out. Love didn't have a stamp. Love didn't count unless you could prove it. So Ruth started writing things down, the date they dropped Talia off, the time, what Brielle wore, what Evans said, every number Ruth tried, every address Ruth visited. At first, Ruth told herself she was writing it down so she wouldn't forget, but deep inside, another thought whispered. What if one day someone tries to rewrite this? Weeks turned into months. No calls, no letters, nothing. And life didn't pause just because Ruth's heart was broken. Talia still had school, she still had chores, she still had birthdays. At first, Talia waited by the phone on her birthday. Ruth baked a cake anyway. She put candles on it. She sang loudly, trying to fill the room with something warm. Talia smiled, but the smile was thin. She blew out the candles and whispered, I wish they would call. Ruth swallowed hard. Me too, she said, because even if the parents didn't deserve it, Talia deserved honesty. The first year was the hardest. Talia was angry, then sad, then quiet. She would snap at Ruth over small things, where shoes went, how the dishes were stacked, why Ruth asked so many questions. Sometimes she would shout, "You don't understand," and run to her room. Ruth would stand in the hallway feeling like she had failed. But later Talia would come out with red eyes and say softly, "I'm sorry." And Ruth would hug her and say, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be here." Ruth worked extra hours. Her back hurt. Her feet ached. But she kept going. She filled out forms. She met with school staff. She took Talia to the doctor and signed papers with a shaking hand, hoping nobody would stop her. Each time someone asked, "Where are the parents?" Ruth's stomach clenched. She learned to answer the same way every time. "They're not available. I'm taking care of her." Some people judged Ruth. Some people whispered that maybe Ruth was too strict, too old, too stubborn. But Ruth didn't care, because every night Talia came home. Every night Ruth put food on the table. Every night Ruth checked the locks and made sure Talia was safe. And slowly, very slowly, Talia started to change. She began to stop waiting for the phone. She stopped staring at the door. She still hurt, but she learned to pack the hurt away so she could breathe. One evening, about a year after the drop-off, Ruth found Talia at the kitchen table with a broken radio taken apart into pieces. Screws were lined up neatly like tiny soldiers. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked. Talia didn't look up. "Fixing it." Ruth blinked. "Do you know how?" Talia shrugged. "Not yet." Ruth watched her fingers move carefully, patiently, like she believed every problem had an answer if you worked long enough. And Ruth felt something new in her chest. Not hope exactly. Something stronger, a quiet promise. Because in that moment Ruth could see it. Talia was learning how to rebuild what other people broke. And Ruth, without realizing it, reached for a notebook and wrote down the date. Not because she was scared, because she knew that one day this would matter. Talia fixed the radio, but it didn't work the first time. It made a sad crackling sound, then went quiet again. Ruth expected her to throw it away. Instead, Talia pulled it apart again, slower this time, like the radio had secrets she was willing to wait for. Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a dish towel. She watched Talia's face, how her eyes narrowed, how her mouth tightened, how she didn't quit. That was when Ruth understood something important. Talia wasn't only trying to fix a radio. She was trying to fix the feeling inside her that said, "People leave." If she could make broken things work again, maybe the world wouldn't feel so unsafe. Over the next few years, that same stubborn focus showed up everywhere. At school, Talia wasn't the loud kid or the popular one. She was the one teachers trusted with hard tasks, the one who stayed after class to ask questions, the one who helped classmates who were failing even if they weren't nice about it. Ruth would come home tired from work and find Talia at the table with books spread out like a small storm. "Take a break," Ruth would say. "In a minute," Talia would answer, without looking up. Sometimes Ruth worried. Not because Talia was doing badly, but because Talia was doing too much, like she was afraid to stop. Like rest might invite pain back in. When Talia turned 16, she got her first part-time job at a small neighborhood store. She stocked shelves, cleaned up spills, carried boxes that were too heavy. One night she came home with blistered hands. Ruth took one look and said, "No, you're not working there anymore." Talia's eyes flashed. "We need the money." Ruth sat her down and opened a small envelope on the table. See, inside were a few bills Ruth had been saving. "I will handle it," Ruth said firmly. "Your job is school." Talia stared at the money like it was proof Ruth had been hiding strength from her. Then her voice turned thin. "Why are you always saving me?" Ruth's throat tightened. "Because nobody saved you when you needed it," Ruth said. Talia blinked fast, then looked away. "I didn't ask you to." "You didn't have to ask," Ruth interrupted, gentle but strong. "That's what family does." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Talia nodded once, like she was accepting a rule of the world she didn't want but needed. From that day on, Ruth noticed something else. Talia started saving too. Not money only. Not just grades. She saved moments, details, facts. Ruth once found a small notebook in Talia's backpack by accident when she was looking for a permission slip. The notebook had dates written neatly on the pages. Some were school dates, some were doctor appointments. And in the back, in very small writing, were lines that made Ruth's stomach turn cold. "Called Mum's old number again. Not in service. Sent message to last email. Returned. Dad's number, no reply." Ruth closed the backpack carefully and didn't mention it. Talia had a right to her own way of surviving. When Talia turned 18, a big envelope came in the mail with the school's name on it. Ruth's hands shook as she opened it. Scholarship. A real one. Enough to cover most of college. Ruth sat down so fast she almost missed the chair. Talia walked in from school and saw Ruth holding the paper. For 1 second, Talia looked like a little girl again, hopeful and terrified at the same time. Ruth smiled with wet eyes. "You did it." Talia's shoulders dropped like she'd been carrying a stone and finally set it down. She didn't cry. She just nodded and said, "We did." College was a new world. Talia learned quickly, but it wasn't easy. Students talked about parents who visited on weekends, parents who sent care packages, parents who called just to chat. Talia didn't join those talks. She would smile politely and step away. Ruth tried to fill the space the best she could. She sent small boxes with snacks, a new pen, a clean notebook, socks when winter came. She wrote short notes that said things like, "Eat," and "Sleep," and "Proud of you." Talia kept every note. During her second year, Talia took an extra class about solving business problems with technology. It sounded boring, but Talia loved it. The teacher gave them a challenge: help a local shop fix a real problem. Most students chose easy projects. Talia didn't. She picked a small grocery store that always had long lines and angry customers. The owner was tired and confused by all the new delivery orders. Everything was messy. Talia walked around the store with her laptop open, asking questions like she was a detective. Where do you write orders down? What happens when someone changes their mind? How do you know what you have in stock? The owner shrugged. I just try. Talia nodded like she understood. We can do better than try. She built a simple system that helped the store track orders and deliveries. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. When the owner hugged her and said, "You saved my shop," Talia stiffened, like she wasn't used to being thanked. Then she smiled, small, real, and bright. That project led her to a campus event where students showed ideas to business people. Ruth almost didn't go because she couldn't take time off work, but Talia insisted. Please, Talia said on the phone. Her voice was steady, but Ruth heard the hidden part underneath. I need you there, so Ruth went. She sat in the back of the room in her best sweater, hands folded, heart racing. Talia stood in front with a simple poster and a laptop. She spoke clearly, not loud but sure. She explained how small shops were losing money because they didn't have good systems, how they needed help that wasn't expensive. Most people barely listened. Then one woman did. The woman had sharp eyes and a serious face. She asked smart questions. She didn't smile to be polite. She smiled only when she was impressed. After the presentation, she walked straight up to Talia. I'm Nina Patel, she said. You have a brain that can build real solutions. Do you want to learn how to protect your work so nobody steals it? Talia's eyes widened. Yes. Nina glanced at Ruth. And you are? Ruth stood quickly. Her grandmother. Nina nodded like she understood everything without being told. Then you've done something right. Over the next months, Nina became the kind of guide Talia needed. She taught Talia how ideas get taken, how people use sweet words to grab what isn't theirs, how a signature can trap you if you don't read carefully. Nina's rules were simple. Or write everything down. Keep copies. Never trust a promise without proof. Ruth heard those words and felt a chill, because Ruth had learned the same lesson the hard way. One evening, Talia came home to Ruth's house for the weekend and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Ruth put a bowl of soup in front of her. Talia didn't start eating right away. She looked at Ruth and said, Grandma, I want to build something bigger than a class project. Ruth sat down slowly. What kind of something? A company, Talia said, and the word sounded scary and exciting at the same time. Not for rich people, for regular people who are always getting left behind. Ruth searched Talia's face. That's a big dream. Talia's voice softened. I'm not doing it to prove anything, Ruth nodded. Then why? Talia looked down at her hands. Because when people leave you, you learn you have to build your own safety. Ruth reached across the table and placed her hand over Talia's. Then build it, Ruth said, but do it smart. Talia nodded once. Then she opened a folder on her laptop. Ruth caught a glimpse of the name typed at the top. Not a fancy name, not a made-up name. It was their last name, Carter. Ruth's stomach tightened. Talia noticed and said quickly, I want to turn that name into something good. Ruth didn't answer right away, because that name still carried the weight of two people who vanished like smoke. But Ruth also knew something else now. Talia wasn't a 14-year-old waiting by the door anymore. She was becoming someone who could make doors open for herself. So Ruth took a slow breath and said, Then we do it carefully." And for the first time in a long time, Ruth felt the future lift its head, quiet, watchful, and full of risk. The day Talia's company got its biggest offer, Grandma Ruth woke up before the alarm. Her body always did that when something important was coming. Even at her age, her mind still acted like a guard dog. It didn't rest when it sensed trouble. Ruth padded into the kitchen and put on the kettle. The house was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. Talia's company had started as one laptop and one small shop that needed help. Now it had grown into something Ruth could barely explain to her neighbors without sounding like she was making it up. "She helps stores run smoother," Ruth would say, keeping it simple. But the truth was bigger. Talia had built tools that helped hundreds of small businesses. She had hired people, she had won awards. Sometimes Ruth would see Talia on the news, speaking calmly in front of a big screen with her company logo behind her. And every time Ruth felt two things at once, pride and fear. Because success makes noise. It shines like a light, and lights attract eyes you didn't invite. That morning, Talia arrived early, wearing a plain blazer and comfortable shoes. She looked neat and ready, but Ruth could see she was holding her breath inside. They ate toast without tasting it. "Your stomach okay?" Ruth asked. Talia nodded, but her fingers tapped the table in a quiet rhythm. Ruth reached across and pressed Talia's hand for a second. "Whatever happens today," Ruth said, "you listen with your head first, then your heart." Talia gave a small smile. "That's exactly what Nina says." Ruth stood to clear the plates, hiding the soft sting of hearing another adult's name in the same sentence as wisdom. Nina had helped Talia in ways Ruth couldn't. Ruth was grateful, but part of her still felt protective, like the world might take credit for what Ruth had done. Still, Ruth reminded herself, this is not about ego. This is about Talia staying safe. At the meeting, Ruth sat in the waiting area while Talia and Nina and the buyers went into a glass room. Ruth could see them through the wall, shapes moving, heads nodding, papers sliding across the table. Ruth stared at the floor tiles and prayed in small, quiet sentences. Let her be wise. Let her be brave. Let nobody trick her. Hours passed. When the door finally opened, Talia stepped out slowly. Her face was calm, but her eyes were shining like someone had turned on a light inside her. Nina smiled. "It's done," she said. Ruth's heart jumped. "Done?" Talia swallowed. "We accepted." Ruth felt dizzy for a second, like the world had tilted. She grabbed the edge of the chair. "How much?" Ruth asked, almost whispering. Talia said the number. Ruth's mind could not hold it at first. It sounded like too many zeros, like something from a movie, not from their small kitchen and their old radio and their nights of cheap soup. Ruth blinked hard. That means you're safe," she said. Talia's smile wobbled. "It means the company is safe, the team is safe, the work. It will keep going." Ruth stood up and hugged her, tight, fierce. The way she hugged her when she was 14 and the world felt like it was falling apart. "I'm proud of you," Ruth said into her hair. Talia's voice was quiet. "I'm proud of us." They celebrated that night at home, not in a fancy place. Ruth cooked Talia's favorite meal. Nina brought a simple cake and refused to let Ruth pay for it. They didn't invite strangers. They didn't invite distant relatives. They kept it small, because small felt real. Talia laughed more than Ruth had ever heard. For a few hours, the years of worry faded. But the next morning, the world reminded Ruth that joy doesn't stop trouble from knocking. Ruth was wiping the counter when Talia's phone buzzed on the table. Talia glanced at the screen. Her smile vanished. Ruth saw it happen like a switch being flipped. "What is it?" Ruth asked. Talia didn't answer right away. She stared at the phone like it was a snake that might strike. Then she said, "Shh, unknown number." Ruth's chest tightened. "Don't answer," Ruth said quickly. "If it's important, they'll leave a message." The phone buzzed again. Same number. Talia's hand hovered over it. Her fingers were steady, but her eyes were not. Ruth recognized that look. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of old pain. Talia took a slow breath and pressed answer. "Hello?" Talia said. Ruth listened, holding her own breath. At first, there was only silence. Then a voice came through the speaker, soft and careful, like a person stepping into a room they didn't belong in. "Talia," the voice said. Ruth's stomach dropped. She knew that voice. Brielle. Talia's mother. Talia's face went pale as if all the blood had rushed to her feet. For a moment, Talia didn't speak. Her eyes drifted to Ruth. And Ruth saw a flash of 14-year-old fear inside 28-year-old strength. Then Talia said very quietly, "How did you get this number?" Brielle gave a tiny laugh like the question was silly. "Oh, honey, it's easy these days. You're everywhere. The news, the internet. I watched your interview." Ruth's hand went cold around the dishcloth. Brielle continued, voice sweet as syrup. "I'm so proud of you. I always knew you were special." Ruth's jaw clenched. Always? 14 years of nothing, and now she always knew? Talia's voice stayed flat. "Why are you calling?" There was a pause, then Brielle sighed like she was the one who had been hurt. "I miss you," she said. "I've missed you for so long." Ruth couldn't stop herself. She leaned closer. She wanted to grab the phone and shout, "You don't get to say that." But Talia's eyes warned Ruth to stay quiet. Brielle's tone changed slightly, still gentle but firmer. "We should meet," she said. "It's time to fix what your grandmother broke." Ruth felt heat rise in her face. Talia's mouth tightened. "Don't talk about my grandmother." Brielle's voice went soft again like she was calming a child. "I know you think she saved you. I know she filled your head with her version. But Talia, you were taken from me." Ruth's hands started shaking again. Talia ended the call without a goodbye. She placed the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. For a long moment, the kitchen was silent except for the kettle clicking as it cooled. Ruth swallowed. "She called you," Ruth said, more to herself than to Talia. Talia nodded once. "She found me the moment the sale became public." Ruth felt sick. The next day, the second hit came. A courier knocked at the door and handed Ruth a thick envelope. The kind of envelope that makes your stomach warn you before your brain even reads it. Ruth opened it at the table, with Talia sitting across from her. Inside were legal papers. Ruth's eyes scanned the words slowly, painfully. "Parental alienation," Ruth read aloud, voice cracking. Talia didn't move. She stared at the papers like she had expected them, like some part of her had always known this would happen one day. Ruth turned the page and saw more lies, written in neat lines like they were facts. That Ruth had blocked calls, that Ruth had hidden Talia, that Ruth had turned a child against her mother. Ruth's hands trembled so hard the paper rattled. Talia reached over and steadied the pages with her palm. "She's not here for me," Talia said, voice low. "She's here for what I have." Ruth looked at her granddaughter, this woman she had raised from a frightened teen into someone powerful, and felt a fierce protectiveness wake up inside her. Ruth pushed the papers into a pile and said, "Then we're going to fight with the truth." Talia nodded. Yes. Ruth picked up her phone and called Mr. Henson's office. When the lawyer answered, Ruth didn't waste time. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were burning. "We've been served," Ruth said, "and she's lying." Mr. Henson's tone sharpened. "Bring everything you have, every record, every date, every scrap of proof." Ruth hung up and looked at the closet door where the dusty box lived. For years she had saved those papers like a habit. Now she understood she had been saving them like a shield. Mr. Henson's office smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. Grandma Ruth sat on a chair that was too soft, clutching her worn folder like it could keep her safe. Talia sat beside her, back straight, face calm, eyes alert. Nina sat across, arms folded, watching everything like she was counting exits. Mr. Henson spread the lawsuit papers on his desk. He didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed. "This is a classic play," he said. "Show up late, cry loud, blame the caregiver, ask for money." Ruth's mouth went tight. "She didn't even call," Ruth said. "Not once." Mr. Henson lifted a hand. "I believe you, but in court, belief is not enough. We need proof that speaks louder than her acting." He tapped the papers. "They're accusing you of blocking contact. They're claiming you poisoned Talia against her mother." Ruth's hands shook. I never said." "I know," Mr. Henson said gently, "but we have to prepare for two problems. Lies and people who want to believe lies." Ruth blinked. "Why would anyone want to believe her?" Mr. Henson leaned back. "Because a clean story is easy. Because a crying mother makes people feel something. And because your granddaughter is wealthy now." Talia's eyes flicked up at that. Ruth felt a hot sting behind her eyes. She hated that money had turned their private pain into a public prize. Nina spoke, voice firm. "So what do we do?" Mr. Henson pointed at Ruth's folder. "We build a timeline. Dates, documents, school records, medical records. Any communication attempts you made, anything that shows who showed up for 14 years. Ruth nodded quickly. "I have a box." "Good," he said. "We'll use it." "Then, Mr. Henson looked at Talia. "And you, Talia. Your words matter too. But we need to be smart. Court can twist emotion into influence." Talia's expression didn't change. "I understand." Ruth watched her granddaughter and felt pride and fear mixing again. Talia looked steady, but Ruth knew the old hurt still lived inside her, like a bruise that never fully healed. Over the next few weeks, Ruth's kitchen table became a battlefield. Papers covered it. Old school forms, doctor slips, mail Ruth had sent that came back stamped, "Return to sender." Receipts from things Ruth had paid for when she should have been saving. Glasses, tutoring, school trips. Ruth labeled everything carefully, even when her eyes blurred. Sometimes she would pause and remember the moment behind the paper. This dentist bill. That was the day Talia sat in the chair gripping Ruth's hand so hard it hurt. This school form. That was the day the office asked, "Where is her mother?" And Ruth smiled like it didn't stab her. This grocery receipt. That was the week Ruth ate toast for dinner so Talia could take lunch to school. Talia helped too. Not by crying, not by yelling, by organizing. She created neat stacks, She typed lists. She made dates line up like bricks. But at night, Ruth heard Talia moving around in her room when she should have been asleep. Sometimes Ruth would walk to Talia's door and stop, hand raised to knock, then lower it again. Because Talia wasn't 14 anymore. And because sometimes people need quiet to hold themselves together. One afternoon, Mr. Henson called. "They filed their evidence," he said. Ruth's stomach dropped. "Evidence?" "Yes," he said. "And it's polished." When they met in his office, he showed him the packet. It looked impressive. Too impressive. Printed screenshots of messages, pictures of gift boxes, statements from people Ruth didn't recognize. A sad letter from Brielle saying she was kept away. Ruth stared at it, confused and furious. "That's not real," Ruth said. "That's not... I never got those gifts." Mr. Henson nodded. "I know. But look how it's presented. It looks like effort. It looks like she tried." Ruth's hands trembled as she flipped through. Some messages had dates. Some were blurry. Some looked like they had been copied and pasted. Talia leaned in and studied the pages quietly, her eyes sharp. Nina pointed at one screenshot. "This date format is odd," she said. "What, some phones don't show it like that." Mr. Henson gave Nina a small approving nod. "We'll check everything. But here's the danger. If the judge is rushed, he may see a crying mother with a packet and an older grandmother with a box and assume the packet is stronger." Ruth's throat tightened. "So, the lie can win just because it's neat." Mr. Henson didn't sugarcoat it. "Sometimes, yes. That's why we must be neater." The hearing day arrived fast, like a storm you see far away but still hits you too soon. The courthouse hallway was loud with footsteps and whispers. This time, Brielle arrived early. She looked even more polished than before. Soft hair, calm face, clothes that said, "Responsible mother." She carried her own binder like she was starring in the story she wanted to sell. When she saw Ruth, she put on a sad smile. "Oh, Ruth," Brielle said softly like they were old friends. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." Ruth felt her jaw tighten. "You didn't have to do this at all," Ruth said. Brielle's eyes widened in fake pain. "I just want my daughter back." Talia stood beside Ruth, silent, eyes straight ahead. Brielle stepped closer, voice lower. "Talia, sweetie, you don't have to let her control you anymore." Ruth felt a flash of anger so strong it made her hands go numb. But Talia spoke first, calm and cold. "Don't call her her," Talia said. "Say her name." Brielle blinked. "Excuse me." Talia's voice stayed steady. "You can say Grandma Ruth. You can say Ruth. But you don't get to talk like she's a stranger." For a second, Brielle's mask slipped. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes sharpened. Then she smiled again, softer. "Of course," Brielle said. "I'm just emotional." Ruth saw it clearly now. Brielle didn't come to heal. She came to win. Inside the courtroom, Brielle's lawyer spoke first again. He painted Ruth as cruel and controlling. He used big words. He pointed at the money from the company sale like it proved greed. Then Brielle took the stand. She cried at the perfect moments. She said she called and called. She said Ruth refused to open the door. She said Ruth turned Talia against her. Ruth sat very still, listening to her own life being rewritten. And the hardest part was this. Brielle sounded believable. Not because she was telling the truth, but because she was confident. Judge Marwick listened, face unreadable. When Brielle finished, she dabbed her eyes and looked at the judge with a helpless expression, like she was the victim. Ruth's stomach twisted. Then the judge turned his sharp eyes toward Ruth. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "do you have records of attempted contact? Proof that the parents abandoned the child rather than being blocked?" Ruth stood slowly, clutching her folder. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. Her voice shook, but she held her chin up. "I have records, years of them." Mr. Henson stepped forward. "We would like to submit the timeline and supporting documents." The judge nodded once. "Proceed." Ruth's heart pounded as Mr. Henson began placing their papers on the table, one careful stack at a time. Not flashy, not dramatic, just real. And for the first time since this nightmare started, Ruth felt something shift inside her, small but strong, like the truth had finally entered the room and taken a seat. The next hearing didn't feel like a movie. It felt like a long, cold test. Grandma Ruth sat at the table while Mr. Henson spoke in a steady voice. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He simply laid down facts like stones in a straight line. "This school form is from the first week Talia lived with Ruth," he said. "It lists Ruth as the only emergency contact." He slid another paper forward. "This medical bill shows Ruth paid for treatment when the parents were unreachable." Another. "This is a returned letter addressed to Brielle and Evan. The post office marked it undeliverable." Ruth listened, heart thumping, while her life was turned into paper proof. On the other side of the room, Brielle's lawyer leaned back, acting bored. Brielle stared down at her hands and sniffled like she was trying not to cry. But Ruth noticed something. Brielle wasn't crying as much today. She was watching, counting, waiting. When Mr. Henson finished placing the stacks, Judge Marwick looked down at the documents. His face stayed serious, but his eyes moved carefully as if he was reading the truth between the lines. Then Brielle's lawyer stood. He walked to the front with a tight smile. "Your Honor," he said, "paper can be collected. Paper can be saved. Paper can be used to build a story." Ruth's stomach tightened. He turned toward Ruth and spoke like he was teaching a class. "Mrs. Carter, isn't it true you did not tell my client where Talia was living?" Ruth blinked. "I didn't know where your client was living," she said. "She vanished." He raised a brow. "But you didn't try hard enough to find her." Ruth's cheeks burned. "Oh, I drove to their apartment. They were gone. I asked neighbors. I went to his work. I called. I sent letters." He smiled like he caught her. "Letters? How many letters?" Ruth looked at Mr. Henson, who nodded slightly. Ruth answered honestly. "At first, I sent many. Then I stopped." The lawyer's voice grew sharper. "So you stopped trying." Ruth's hands clenched under the table. "I stopped sending letters to places that didn't exist," she said. "But I never stopped taking care of Talia." The lawyer stepped closer. "Isn't it also true, Mrs. Carter, that you didn't encourage Talia to forgive her mother?" Ruth's heart pounded. This was the trap. Make Ruth sound bitter. Make her sound controlling. Ruth took a breath and chose her words like stepping on thin ice. "I encouraged Talia to focus on school," Ruth said. "I encouraged her to be kind. I never told her to hate anyone." Brielle's lawyer tilted his head. "But you admit you were angry." Ruth looked at the judge. "I was scared," she said, voice cracking. "I was 63. A child was left at my door. I didn't know if her parents were alive or dead or running from something. I was scared for her." Judge Morrick's eyes narrowed slightly. "Running from something," he repeated. Ruth swallowed. "They said she'd be safer with me," Ruth said, "but they never told me why." A small ripple ran through the room. Quiet interest, like people leaning forward without moving. Brielle's lawyer quickly changed the subject, like he didn't want that question to grow. He lifted one of Brielle's screenshots. "Your Honor, we also have proof of attempted contact." He faced the judge. "These show messages and calls my client made." Mr. Henson stood at once. "Your Honor, we request time to verify these images. Screenshots can be edited." Brielle's lawyer scoffed softly. "That's a convenient claim." Judge Marwick raised a hand, cutting him off. "It's not convenient," the judge said. "It's accurate. I've seen fabricated evidence before." Ruth's chest loosened just a little. Then something else happened. Judge Marwick picked up one screenshot and stared at it longer than the others. "What is this date?" he asked. Brielle's lawyer smiled again. "That is the date my client attempted contact." The judge's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. "This format looks inconsistent with the other pages," he said. "And this time stamp appears cropped." Brielle's smile twitched. For the first time, Ruth saw a crack. Not in the truth, in Brielle. Brielle shifted in her chair. Her hands tightened around her tissue. Mr. Henson spoke carefully. "Your Honor, we can provide phone records from Ruth's side. We can also request records from carriers if needed." The judge nodded slowly. "Good. I want verification. I will not decide a case like this on pretty packets and tears." Ruth almost sagged with relief, but the judge wasn't finished. He turned toward Talia. "Ms. Carter," he said, "you are an adult now. You've been described as influenced, controlled, even manipulated. I want to hear from you directly, briefly and clearly." Talia stood. The room seemed quiet just because she stood. Not because she was famous, because her calm was heavy, like it meant something. Talia looked at the judge, not at Brielle. "When I was 14, Talia said, "I was left at my grandmother's home with a suitcase. My parents drove away. That is the truth." Brielle's lawyer started to object, but Judge Marwick lifted a finger and the lawyer stopped. Talia continued. "My grandmother did not hide me. I went to school, I went to doctors, I had jobs, I lived a normal life without them." She paused, then added, "I also didn't grow up confused about who showed up." Ruth felt her throat tighten. Judge Marwick leaned forward. "Do you have any personal record that supports your timeline?" Talia's eyes didn't flicker. "Yes," she said. Ruth turned slightly, surprised. She knew Talia kept things close, but she hadn't known how far it went. Mr. Henson spoke quickly, careful. "Your Honor, we can submit it in an organized way with the rest of the verified evidence." The judge nodded. "Do that." Brielle's face stayed composed, but her eyes looked sharper now, less watery. The pretty sadness was slipping away. Judge Marwick set the papers down and spoke to the room. "Here is what will happen next. I am ordering verification of digital evidence. I will review the caregiver records. And at the next hearing, I expect clarity. No performances." He looked straight at Brielle. "If anyone is caught lying under oath, there will be consequences." Ruth felt a chill, not because she feared the consequences, because she could see, finally, that the judge was beginning to see what Ruth had lived. Outside the courtroom, Ruth and Talia walked side by side down the hallway. Ruth wanted to ask, "What record do you have?" But she didn't. Talia's face was calm, but her eyes were focused like she was holding something fragile and powerful at the same time. As they reached the doors, Talia spoke softly, almost like she was talking to herself. "She thinks this is about money," Talia said. Ruth swallowed. And it's not. Talia shook her head once. No, she said. It's about the story she wants to erase. Ruth looked at her granddaughter and felt something steady settle in her chest. Because whatever Talia was carrying, whatever she planned to show, it wasn't for drama. It was for the truth. The final hearing day came with grey skies and a cold wind that pushed at the courthouse doors. Grandma Ruth held her folder close, but it didn't feel heavy today. It felt steady. Talia walked beside her, quiet and focused. My Nina was there too, and Mr. Henson carried a thick binder with coloured tabs. Everything was neat. Everything was ready. Across the hallway, Brielle arrived like she was stepping onto a stage. She wore soft colours, the kind that made her look harmless. She carried a tissue like it was part of her outfit. Her lawyer spoke to her in a low voice, and Brielle nodded, eyes shiny. Ruth didn't look away this time. She looked straight at Brielle and thought, you can dress up, but you can't wash away 14 years. Inside the courtroom, Judge Marwick entered and everyone stood, then sat. The judge looked tired of drama. That was good. Today, Judge Marwick said, I want truth, not performance. Brielle's lawyer stood first like he always did, like he owned the room. Your Honour, my client's pain is real, he said. Hush, she was kept away from her daughter. The grandmother poisoned the child's mind. Now that the child is wealthy, the grandmother has turned her into a weapon. Ruth's fingers tightened. Brielle dabbed her eyes and gave a small, broken sigh. But the judge didn't soften. He looked at the lawyer and said, we are past feelings. We are here for facts. Brielle's lawyer cleared his throat. We submitted evidence of contact attempts, messages, calls. Judge Marwick picked up one sheet and tapped it with his finger. And we verified those, he said. Brielle's lawyer blinked. Yes, Your Honour. The judge's voice stayed calm. Some are real, some are not. The room went silent. Ruth felt her pulse jump. Brielle's face froze for a half second, then she quickly looked down like she was ashamed. But Ruth saw it. It wasn't shame. It was calculation. Judge Marwick continued. Several screenshots provided by the plaintiff were inconsistent with carrier logs and metadata. In simple terms, parts were altered. Brielle's lawyer stiffened. Your Honour, we... Enough, the judge said. If you wish to continue, do so carefully. Brielle's tissue trembled in her hand. Her eyes filled again, but the tears looked different now. They looked angry. Then Judge Marwick turned toward Ruth. Mrs. Carter, he said, your records show consistent caregiving. School records, medical records, daily life records. That matters. Ruth swallowed hard. She nodded because if she tried to speak, she might break. Then the judge turned toward Talia. Ms. Carter, he said, you stated you have personal records as well. I will allow you to present them. Keep it clear. Talia stood. She didn't look at Brielle. She looked at the judge, and she held something in her hands. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't emotional. It was perfect for court. It was a simple, organized folder with a clean timeline on top. A single page that said in bold letters, 14 years. Who showed up? Underneath were dates and short lines, like a map of her life. Talia's voice was calm and easy to understand. Your Honour, Talia said, I'm going to show you 3 things. They are simple, they are real, and they match records you can verify. She handed Mr. Henson the folder, and he passed copies to the judge and the other side. Brielle leaned forward, squinting. Talia began. First, she said. "This is my school record history. It lists my address each year. It shows I wasn't hidden. I was enrolled. I attended. And I had the same guardian contact the entire time." She paused. "My grandmother." Ruth's eyes stung. "Second," Talia said, "this is a list of every emergency contact on my forms, every year. It is always my grandmother. There is no point where my mother or father is listed because they were not available." Brielle's lawyer stood fast. "Objection?" Judge Marwick lifted a hand. "Denied. Continue." Talia nodded once and kept going. "Third," Talia said, "this is the part that answers the lie." She turned one page. On it was a simple table of dates and messages. Talia said, "When I was younger, I wanted my parents to come back. I didn't stop caring just because I was hurt. So I tried to reach them. I didn't do it to build a case. I did it because I was a kid who wanted her mom." Ruth felt her chest squeeze. Talia pointed to the dates. "These are the times I called the last numbers I had. These are the times I emailed the last addresses I had. And these are the times letters were returned." She looked up at the judge. "These attempts were made by me, not my grandmother, so they cannot be blamed on her." A small sound came from Brielle's side of the room, a sharp breath. Brielle's eyes were wide now, not with sadness, with alarm. Talia continued steady as stone. "I also included proof that my grandmother did not block gifts or messages," Talia said, "because there were none." Brielle's lawyer snapped. "That's not true." Judge Mark looked at him. "Sit down," he said firm, "or I will have you removed." The lawyer sat. Brielle rose suddenly, voice shaking. "You're doing this because she trained you." Brielle pointed toward Ruth. "She hates me. She made you hate me." Ruth flinched, but Talia didn't. Talia turned her head slowly and looked at Brielle for the first time. Her voice stayed simple. "You didn't call me for 14 years, Talia said. "You didn't come to my school. You didn't show up when I was sick. You didn't come when I graduated. You didn't come when I struggled. You came when the news said I had millions." Brielle's face twisted. "I was kept away." Talia shook her head once. "No," she said. "You were gone. There's a difference." Judge Marek leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Ms. Carter," he asked, "are you stating under oath that you were not alienated, but abandoned?" Talia answered clearly. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Marek looked down at the timeline again. Then he looked at Ruth's records. Then he looked at Brielle. His voice was steady, and it filled the room like a final door shutting. "This court finds no credible evidence of parental alienation by the grandmother," Judge Marwick said. "In fact, the records show consistent care, stability, and presence." Brielle's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Judge Marwick continued, "The plaintiff's claim is dismissed. Any further actions based on falsified evidence may lead to penalties." Ruth's knees went weak, not because she wanted to win, because the truth had finally been spoken out loud by someone with power. Talia sat down slowly. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were glossy. Ruth reached for her hand under the table, and Talia squeezed back. After court, outside in the cold air, Ruth and Talia stood on the steps. For a moment they didn't speak. Then Talia turned to Ruth and said softly, "You never stole me." Ruth's voice broke. "I only held you," she whispered. Talia nodded. "And that's why I'm here." Nina smiled gentle. Mr. Henson gave a small, satisfied nod. Brielle walked out later, surrounded by people who suddenly didn't look impressed anymore. Her perfect mask was gone. She kept her eyes forward like she could outrun the truth. But the truth stayed right where it was. With Ruth, with Talia, and with 14 years that could not be erased. If you want more stories like this, stories where the truth fights back, type next story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so you don't miss the next one.